Hello, I'm out and about on the streets with a camera today, and I'm not doing street photography. I'm talking about ICM, and I'm going to give you 5 useful tips for how to find and shoot and kind of work with the technique of ICM. If you're not familiar with ICM, it stands for intentional camera movement. The whole purpose of it is to move the camera whilst you have the shutter open, and it creates wonderful blurs and streaks and kind of dynamic shots, but it can also create utter rubbish. It's a very dull and windy day, which to a degree isn't a bad set of conditions for ICM, because it already allows us to slow the camera shutter down because there's not a great deal of light. I really don't know what kind of shots I'm going to get today. Probably not that many. It's probably going to be more of a talky video. But I'm heading to the one place I know I will get a shot, because I've done it before. Not in the same place, but in similar places. So I'm heading off to the church. And when we're talking about selecting subjects for an ICM, I'm talking about just normal, everyday things that you might just ordinarily shoot in a straight fashion. For instance, churches. I love coming to churches for photography. There are so many opportunities in these places. The light is generally gorgeous, whether it's just coming in gently through windows like this. And yeah, the place is actually really quite dark. As you can see, I'm in a light area lit by this window up here, and you can see how I'm very much darker otherwise. But one of the things that works incredibly well for ICM, particularly in churches, is the symmetry of main aisle. So here I'm just going to do a kind of up-down motion. I've set the shutter for a second so I can get as much movement as I can. I'm being very careful to put this as close to the centre of the aisle and as level as possible, because I've got to keep this under control. I'm going to start down here. 2-second timer on this. That one's okay. Let's try again. And you see there's an up down. There's a bit of a twist to that one. Didn't control that very well. That's not too bad. Hope you like one. So the left and right symmetry here is from a double exposure in post-processing. It's a rather pleasing abstract. Without this further technique, it looks something like this. And again, it's still quite photogenic. So with a shot in the church in the bag, well, a few shots in fact, let's walk around the village to find some other compositions that will work. So I don't want to spend too long labouring the point about compositions. There's a path here. It looks as though it might be a shortcut to the centre of the village. So just because we have an idea of movement in these images, what you don't want to do is get the idea that you need in some way some kind of different way of composing. At the end of the day, it's going to be a photograph like any other, well, not like any other obviously, but it's going to be a photograph. So you've still got to captivate the viewer, you've still got to take their eye through a shot, that you've still got to do all of the things that you would expect a normal photo to be able to do. So we'll talk about the compositions a little more when we find them. And in the meantime, I want to talk about how we need to kind of get that shutter speed down so that we can create the movement. What we're not trying to do here is emulate camera shake. We're trying to really induce this idea of movement into an image. And to achieve a slower shutter speed, we obviously need to have an idea of how the camera works with exposure. Of course, exposure is one of the fundamentals of photography, and often your camera will do it for you. It might not make the greatest job of it all of the time, but it will work to get what it thinks of as an optimum exposure. That's great for normal photography, well, great-ish, but understanding how it does it is also important. It's a bit like knowing how to drive, but knowing also how to change a wheel is vitally important. In order to capture movement, we need to slow the shutter down and create what we call a long exposure. Now, a long exposure in photography terms is anything kind of slower than, say, a quarter of a second. So we're not talking about days, hours, minutes or anything. It's just, yeah, it's just not 1/100th of a second or 5/100th of a second, because those shutter speeds won't capture the movement unless the movement is incredibly fast. However, your camera is not going to give you those slow shutter speeds, even necessarily on a dull day like this. What do we got here? Hold on, let me put this into camera does everything mode. I'm getting 2/100th of a second on what you can see here is really quite a dull day. 2/100th of a second is of no use to me at all. Oh man, that wind, it's brutal. If I stand facing it, you'll probably get wind noise, even though the mic's buried just inside all of the clothes here. It's I don't know how long I can stay here. Let's get back to the topic. Slowing down the shutter is all about capturing less light. The whole point is that light is cumulative when we're talking about photography, so the longer the sensor or the film has light on it, the more light it collects. It's a simple way of looking at it. So if we slow down the shutter, we also therefore have to make other adjustments to the exposure in order to get a correct exposure, so to speak. So if we darken the image using the aperture by increasing the f-stop number, we're letting in less light, and therefore we need to expose for longer to achieve that. And in situations like this, it will probably work. Earlier on, when I was talking about a 2/100th of a second, that's what the camera was showing me, but I hadn't taken into account that I had a very wide open aperture. When I started stopping that down, I'm getting closer to the ideal kind of shutter speeds, so somewhere in the region of a third, quarter of a second, half a second, something like that. And we use a combination of the ISO, keep it as low as possible, the aperture, and the shutter speed to get our exposure. Now, if we still can't get our exposure as low as we'd like using those techniques, we've got to use some ND filters. Now, of course, ND filters do cost money. If you haven't already got some, there's some links to a variable ND filter from K&F Concepts down below. I think you may find it useful. But you don't have to use these, because what you can do is simply choose your conditions to go out and try this technique in. If you come out in conditions as I have today, where they are dull and bloody cold, then you can get away without ND filters. If you do the work inside, as I did with the church shots, you can get away without ND filters. I've already mentioned the K&F filters, for which there's an affiliate link down below. I think I've said that. And now I've got my Valorette photography gloves on, which are exceptionally good. I often don't like wearing gloves because you just don't get enough of a sense of feel in your fingers, do you? But these are particularly nice. Excuse the method of this, because I'm holding the camera, but finger, and there's little magnets on the back of these to hold them back out of the way. They are simply brilliant. Link down below, and if you buy a pair of these, they're stunning for winter photography. I'll get a small commission off of it. So I shot this off camera more as a test. I rather liked it in the end, but it was too cold to do a piece. Okay, I admit defeat. The wind is brutal. Ordinarily, I would probably try something with the lobster pots and the boats there, but that wind is just brutal. Don't be afraid of shooting textures as ICMs either. Now, these walls, there's lots of brick and flint walls in Norfolk. They are really very beautiful things. The array of colours and shapes and textures and everything in them make them great for just straight photography. But you can also do something with them with ICM as well. So textures do make a good subject for ICM. You don't need a lot of movement for them. In actual fact, quite often when you've got kind of complicated things like these walls already, you don't want to have big sweeping movements. Kind of little circular movements with the camera work very, very well. And one of the questions I'm always asked about ICM is, should you turn IBIS off? Yes, absolutely. Turn IBIS off, turn any lens stabilization off, turn the body stabilization off. Because there's no point in trying to capture movement and have your camera fight against it. So every day's a learning day, and I wondered whether this tower here would work nicely as an ICM. And I quickly found out that it doesn't. Well, the principal reason being that to make a reasonable ICM, because you end up capturing the movement more than you capture the subject, so to speak, what you really need is a decent amount of contrast. And if I just swing you around so you can see this tower a little more here, there it is behind me, you'll see that there's nothing in the sky, it's white, there's just kind of nothing, it blurs into nothing. So whenever you're looking for these subjects, look for some contrast as well, because if you don't have that, it's not going to look very good. It's probably not worth shooting. So there's a couple of other tips that I want to put into this video as well to make it up to the 5 that I promised you. The first one is you've got to shoot lots, because this is a very imprecise science. You can't guarantee to make the same movement with your camera on successive images. Yeah, your starting point's going to be different, your ending point's going to be different. Therefore, we need to shoot quite a few, because you're going to get to the point of saying, oh, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. Oh, that one's nice. And that takes me to the point that what you also want to do is, when you're shooting loads of them, is you chimp. You need to look at what you're shooting, and you need to look pretty much every single time, because you might miss something that's good, or something that's goodish but not quite there, something that needs perhaps a little bit of work. And let's say, for argument's sake, you've shot off 5 images, and then you go back and you look at the 5, and the first one's great and the other 4 are rubbish, and you don't remember exactly how you did the first one. You need to be mindful of how you're shooting these, and therefore, if you're conscious of where that movement is and you review on every single shot, then you can kind of modify and hone that movement in order to get something better on the subsequent shots. I've come back to the church because I don't feel that I got nearly enough decent shots earlier, and I thought perhaps we'd get something with the entranceway here. It's got contrast, this big black hole in it. It might work quite well. So I'm quite close to this. I think just a little bit of movement will work. I don't want too much from just the roof line. I certainly don't want the sky. 2-second timer and just that little bit of movement. And that's quite interesting. If you found these 5 tips useful, consider checking out the videos appearing on screen right now. If you'd like to learn more, get in touch and perhaps we can do a workshop together. Don't forget to click the like button, buy me a coffee, subscribe, all of that stuff. Take care.